Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, and today I want to take some time out to really talk to you guys about grading card companies that are out there. This has been a huge topic of discussion. I continue to see it pop up all over the place. There's a lot of misinformation that goes out there, and I want you to know that there's a lot of decisions that you should be making when it comes to grading your card company, and there isn't any one card company that's going to be able to address your hobby needs. I see a lot of people out there that treat these individual grading card companies like they're professional sports teams, and they will just go to bat for them, ride or die the whole way there. And these are all individual tools for us collectors and investors to really use and maximize, and there's going to be cards that make sense to go to one versus the others. And I really wanted to kind of pull all the information together that I use to make a decision on where I send these cards out to, kind of tell you the pros and cons of each particular company and their services, so that you can make an informed decision whenever you're deciding where to send those cards out. So the first thing I always look at is obviously going to be the price. Now the price is going to vary per card, per company, for the turnaround time that you're looking at. You know, the more valuable the card is, it's going to scale on the cost for pretty much all the companies, with the exception of I think BGS. I don't believe they have any tiers for the particular size cards they have, but it's kind of built into their insurance on the back end. But the price to grade does not scale based on the value of the card for that one particular company. For BGS and CGC, they both scale. BGS is the only one that really doesn't in that particular case. So yeah, the first one we want to look at is like PSA. So PSA scales probably the most aggressively based on the value of their cards. So right now they have their value, which is $10 a card roughly to get graded, and it covers up to $199 in graded value. Their $20 service is currently suspended at the making of this video, but normally would cover up to about a $500 value. Their $50 service covers up to about $1,000 in value. Their $75 Express service covers about $2,500, and their Super Express covers up to $5,000, and it keeps scaling and scaling and scaling. So if you've got more valuable cards, you can go check out their price list, and you can find out exactly how much you'd be looking just to have your card graded. And the flip side of that, CGC's has their $8 bulk rate, which covers up to $100 value in cards, graded value. Their economy, which is $15, covers up to $400. Their standard, which is $20, covers up to $1,000 in value. And their express, which is $30 a card, covers up to $10,000. And then Beckett's is just based on the turnaround time that you're looking at. So their 60-day service can go, depending on how many cards you submit, is anywhere from $10 to $15 a card. Their 20-day service is $15 to $25 a card. Their 5-day service is $40 a card, and their 2-day service is $50 a card. And the value of the card has really no impact when you send it out to BGS. Now those prices for two of those companies, CGC and PSA, are both membership based. Membership for PSA has actually been turned off currently, so that's something to keep in mind. You'll have to use a middleman basically to submit to PSA to take advantage of those lowest price points. But when the memberships are available, both memberships come with a lot of perks. Both highly recommend, both on PSA versus CGC. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're submitting, is looking how much each card is going to cost you to submit. Now on the other side of that is the turnaround time, which is directly kind of part and parcel to the value of that cost. As you scale the higher dollar amounts, you're also getting a quicker turnaround time. So BGS directly correlates with their turnaround time. The other two companies, while they're scaling with the value of the card, they're also shortening that turnaround time. So you can pay more just to increase or decrease the turnaround time on a less valuable card as well. So you've got PSA's turnaround times on their Express is, I think, 5 or 10 business days right now. With their regular, the $50 ones, and again, these all vary slightly, especially right now during the shutdowns that they've had to deal with and the overwhelming number of submissions that they're dealing with. I think the regular service or $50 service is about a 30-day turnaround, 20 to 30 days. With their $10 service, basically, for all intents and purposes, an indefinite amount of time. I've heard as long as 9 months on their $10 submissions that are out there, which is unfortunately just a very long amount of time, but you can only process so many things with keeping the quality of the cards up as they are. Beckett's similar delays on their 60-day and their 20-day services have all been pushed back. Those numbers have not been as dramatically affected as PSA has, but I know they are working on delays on their end as well. And then CGC, being the new kid on the block, they don't have that backlog right now, so they've been very quick to turn things around. So as far as actual turnaround time goes and getting your cards back in your hands, you just can't beat CGC right now. They are just far and away the fastest, and that's pretty much on every level of service that they have, minus the walk in and hand it off to, you know, a BGS or PSA employee and get it that same day. Aside from that, CGC is just far and away the quickest turnaround. Now we want to make sure that with taking into consideration how much we're spending to send these off, how quickly they come back, we also want to make sure that they have a value when they get back. And this is probably the biggest thing that I see people put false information out there for, is that there's certain value that's associated with certain grades, etc., which is true, but that, you know, one company doesn't have value at all, or one company's grades at a certain level don't have the same prestige. There's a lot of misinformation that goes on out there. So for those of you out here, this is not opinion, this is fact. This is stuff that I've been, you know, researching to make sure that I'm making the best decision for a lot of it. And with that being said, PSA from grades 1 to grades 9 are going to be your value leaders. And it's not particularly close. So if you have a PSA 9 graded card versus a CGC or a BGS 9, the PSA is going to sell for more pretty much 9 times out of 10, minus those kind of one-off bidding wars that drive up the price on something else. And there's a couple reasons behind that. One, they've been around forever. They've been doing this forever. They're trusted. People want or know that they're going to be getting a quality card whenever that comes through. And that's true. Two, you've got a lot of these people who are collecting these older card sets that have already got, you know, 3/4, half their set, maybe almost the entire set done in PSA slabs because they've been around for so long. So they want those sets to match, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've got a little bit of an OCD collector in myself, so if I had majority of my collection in one slab and one slab only, I'm going to continue to search out those slabs. The last reason is there's not a whole lot of people outside of the hobby that are just kind of tipping their toes in that know about a lot of other grading services other than PSA because they're so big. So when they're searching for graded cards on your third-party sites like eBay, etc., they're searching specifically for PSA and may not even be aware that the CGC company or the BGS companies are also highly sought-after grading card companies. So there's just not the same exposure on there as well, which is why you'll see a lot of listings on those sites where they'll mention PSA in there just so it pops that search result when people send it out. Now for the 9s and up is where you kind of run into the dilemma on the value part. So for the general consensus, and it's not even really the general consensus, they post what they're grading for on their pages with the exception of CGC, and to get a 10 in PSA, the requirements to do that are just lower than they are for CGC or Beckett. So a 10 in CGC or in Beckett is going to require stricter guidelines than it is for PSA. So that kind of plays into what we're looking at as far as where we should send cards to. If you've got a card that clearly is not in perfect condition but is a minor imperfection, you have a much better chance of getting PSA 10 than you would at a CGC 10 or a BGS 10. So with that in mind, when you get into that 10 level, that is when you start to see that the values start to equalize. CGC and BGS both have a pristine 10 condition, so not necessarily a perfect 10, and then their perfect 10 equivalent. And they've got different names for them. For BGS, it's their black label 10 and their gold label versus their gold label 10. So they have 4 subgrades, and all the companies grade on those 4 subgrades. BGS and CGC will actually break down the subgrades, and if you have a perfect 10 in all of those categories, you can get their perfect score equivalent. If you have majority 10s and maybe one 9.5, you can get their not perfect 10 grade. But again, with those subgrades, it helps establish that value. So on your 10s value points, your CGC and your BGS 10s do tend to be worth at least equivalent amounts to the PSA 10s. And if it's a strong 10 or a perfect 10, then that value is going to go much higher. And that's where BGS really comes into play, because their BGS black label is extremely highly sought after, because it's basically the definition of a perfect card in the hobby at this point in time. So the multiplier on that perfect 10, you can take a $500 ungraded card. If it gets that black label perfect scores, I mean, you're looking at $6,000, $7,000 sometimes, depending on the population reports on that particular card, if it's a hard card to grade, etc., etc. Whereas a PSA 10 of that exact same card, maybe an $800 to $1,000 card. So you really have to kind of separate those two categories. You know, PSA 10 is as high a score as PSA offers, but CGC and BGS both kind of have a further 10, because they have those half grades and they have those subgrades that can be perfects as well, that help push the values for those particular ones there. So overall value wise, if your card has got some obvious wear and tear on it and it's not going to, you know, qualify for those 10s, value wise you're almost always going to be better off with PSA versus BGS or CGC. Now that's going to bring us to the quality of these grades. Now I hear a lot of people saying, you know, this or that about individual companies, what they do grade and what they don't grade. Keep in mind that these cards are all graded by humans for the most part. Some checks and balances involved, but there are going to be mistakes that are made. There's going to be exceptions to every rule, but for the vast majority of the cards I see, the grades are very accurate. Now keep in mind, again, they have different grading scales. So what may be a 6 for one company may not be a 6 for another company, because they do not grade the same. That does not mean one company is right and one company is wrong. That just means their defined grading scale is different. See a lot of confusion with that. Having said that, and we kind of mentioned it earlier in the video, you've got to kind of take a look at the card that you have and determine what is the strongest grading card company for that particular card. So whenever I'm making decisions on my cards, you know, if I've got that pristine looking card, pack fresh, right out of it, and there's a slight off-centering on the front of the card, for example, that card will most likely grade a 10 for PSA, but it may not get that full 10. It might get that 9.5 grade for one of the CGCs or the Beckett. So having said that, I really want to take a look at a couple cards that I've had come back, tell you what my thoughts are on them, if I would regrade them, kind of what I was thinking when I sent them to each company, and then I'm going to take a look at some of the cards that I'm getting ready to send off and tell you where my thoughts are at on which company that I'm choosing to send those to. Okay, so I've kind of cherry-picked 4 of the cards that I've gotten back from recent submissions. I already know the grades on these cards, and if you follow me on any of the other social media platforms, you guys know the grades on these cards because I've posted them up as they've come back in. But I really want to kind of talk to you about, you know, how I felt about the grade that came back, what I would do differently if I would do something differently, what those other options would look like for me, and kind of give you an idea of the technical side of it in a real-world environment versus just kind of the abstracts that are going out there. So, first one we're going to look at here, this is a Shadowless Charizard. Now, if anybody gets mad at you about the aesthetics on these cards, just tell them to shut up. I mean, there's really nothing else I can tell you about that. If you like the way the slabs look, you like the way the slabs look. See a lot of people out there criticizing people, talking about how ugly they've made their cards. That is their opinion and their opinion alone. I personally like all the different slabs for different reasons. I like the cards for different reasons. It's just your opinion on that particular matter should have no bearing to anybody else. So if you have a strong opinion on it, you're probably best to keep it to yourself. And I digress. Looking at the card here, it got an 8.5. You can see the subgrades here. Again, something I love about CGC and BGS is being able to look at these subgrades because it lets you know why. I mean, there's sometimes you'll send that perfect condition card off to PSA and it'll come back a PSA 8, and your mind, it just drives you nuts. You're looking all over the card trying to figure out where it's going, and this really helps kind of narrow it down. Centering a 9, surface 8, corners 8.5, edges 8.5. Now, you cannot get more than one grade higher than your lowest grade with CGC. So if I have this 8 here, even if all the other categories were 10, 8.5 is going to be the highest grade that this card can get. So that's something to keep in mind when you're getting something out. If it's got one major defect on the card, whatever that defect is going to bring down the overall grade to it. So I definitely agree with the grade on this particular one. You'll not be able to see it on this camera here. Under a microscope, you can see some surface imperfections on the front. There's a little bit of a smudge on the back, which I think might actually clean up and may be able to bring the surface score up to an 8.5, possibly a 9. But I wouldn't hold my breath on that particular one. There's some whitening on the edges. The centering on the back, as you can tell, is quite bad, which is where our centering score got docked. It's off left to right and top to bottom. But overall, very solid score. So now this particular card, hitting that 8.5 really is kind of an odd spot. So, and I'll tell you why. So this particular card cost $30 to grade at the CGC company, plus $5 for the subgrade. So $35 total. If this were to cross grade over to a PSA 9, the cost for submission for this particular card would be over $500. So huge difference in cost to get the cards graded. However, a CGC 8.5 on this particular card is worth about $2,200 to $3,000, whereas a PSA 9 version of this card would go for upwards of $12,000 to possibly $15,000, depending on what the market is at that particular time. So you can see how much that change in grade and change in company can really help push the ball and the value. On the other side of that, you've got to make sure that the value's there before you submit. So one thing I really like about the CGC company is, due to the speed of the submissions and the low cost of the submissions, it's a really nice way to kind of test the waters on the grades of your cards. So like if you're submitting these cards out and you're like, hey, I don't know if this Charizard is going to come back a 7 or a 9 with PSA. I don't know if I should get the $75 service or the $500 service. Here's the kind of way to kind of test the waters with a professional company that's going to give you a good idea of where that thing falls. Now, do I think this would cross grade to a 9? That's another big topic of discussion, that because of the harshness of BGS and CGC's grades, that they do tend to cross grade higher. I will say that I have not personally cross graded anything between the companies, but from the research that I've done, that is generally the case, that you're going to at least get the same grade that you had, if not a higher grade, cross-grading from one of those two companies to PSA. These half grades do kind of make that tricky, though. So do I think this one would roll up, or do I think it would roll down? And it's one of those kind of coin toss ones. So we've got that 8 surface, and if that's really what they lock onto at the PSA company, this could come back a PSA 8. But with these other ones, they don't have half scores for theirs. So if these both rolled up to a 9, centering, they agreed with a 9. Their centering guidelines are a little bit more lax, so this could possibly even get, rolled up to a 10 centering for theirs. Maybe it's enough to pull it up to a 9 for that particular grade. So this one will probably get cross-graded in the future. I'll crack this thing open, clean it up, resubmit it at probably that $500 mark. To get that one done. The next one we're looking at here is a Charizard Shiny V 9.5. Came back 9.5 on the centering, the surface, corner, and then a 9.5 on the edges. So this one, the centering was off by just a hair on the front. If I had caught the centering issues on it, I may have submitted it differently. Because again, this one is almost guaranteed to be a PSA 10. And the difference in value between a PSA 10 and a CGC 9.5 is probably about $400. So I was really hoping for a 10, possibly even a perfect 10. Like I said, on a 9.5 on the edges, that's going to be microscopic stuff. That is not something that you're going to see with the naked eye. The centering on the front, honestly, I had to zoom in to several times magnification before I could even get an accurate reading that it was off, but it is just off a hair from top to bottom. Like I said, I don't even know that you'd be able to tell from the images here. So if I was resubmitting this one, and again, this is probably something that would get cross-graded. This particular one would go back to PSA. I'm fairly confident that this one would cross-grade again. They don't have half grades, so if these 9.5s get rounded up to 10s, that's pretty much 10s across the board for a PSA, and would increase the value of this particular card by a considerable amount. Now, these also are looking at, when you talk about BGS candidates. So one of the things I'm very hesitant when I submit to anything to like a company like BGS, the cost is pretty prohibitive to get quick service and these subgrades. So for this card here, again, this was $35 to get submitted with subgrades. Actually, I think it was only $25 because it's a little bit less in value than the other Charizard was. So $25 to submit through CGC. That same card through Beckett Grading Services on a subgrades, it's right around $100. So again, this becomes a very cost-efficient and quick way to kind of test the waters. If you submit something to CGC, it comes back quad 10s across the board, which is all 4 10 categories here. You've got a really strong contender to then submit that card to BGS and try for that black label. So very rarely would BGS ever be my first place that I go to submit a card to, just because when you submit to BGS, the thing you're really looking for is that black label. Some people really like the gold labels. They don't move the value nearly as much as that black label does, though. So this becomes a way to kind of test the waters. If this had come back a quad 10 in all 4 categories, I definitely would be looking at resubmitting this one to BGS. Then the other one here, this one's really just kind of show you an example of one that may not cross-grade differently. So again, another shiny Charizard V. This one got a 9 right out of the pack. Centering on this one's off on the front and the back, so where you get that very low centering score of 8.5. Again, PSA doesn't do half scores, so it would probably round up to a 9. They are a little bit more lenient on those as well. Surface 9, corners 9.5, and edges 9. Again, looking at the card in the case, you're really not going to see any of the imperfections other than the centering. But again, you see a lot of people out there like, oh, if it's a CGC 9, it's going to cross-grade to a PSA 10. Not always the case. And if you look at these here, again, I think the centering would probably roll up to a 9 for a PSA. But if you have a 9 in centering for PSA, surface, we'll say they grade the surface the same, a 9 at PSA. They give the corners, let's say it rolls up to a 10 at PSA. You've got, and then the edge is a 9. You have 3 9s and a 10. That's probably not going to get a 10 at PSA. So you really want to make sure that you're not just cracking all these open, sending them out. Again, because there's no guarantee that it's going to roll up. If you have strong grades and a half grade, those are the ones I would consider cross-grading. This particular one, I would say, is probably going to come back a PSA 9 if it gets resubmitted. All right, and then the next one we're looking at here is another Charizard. And the reason why I selected this one is because the reason why this card was sent to CGC, honestly, it was right out of the pack. It looked very sharp. You know, if we thought we were going to get 10s out of it, but a big reason why I picked CGC for this one was the turnaround time. Like, I knew I could count on the turnaround time to get it back quickly. Sent some cards out to PSA about the same time I had submitted this one. They have not even been processed for grades yet. So you talk about like these cards, getting these back in hands. As a collector, you want to hold these cards, but as a content creator too, I can't have cards gone for 9 months if I'm using those for follow-up videos. So having the ability to get these cards back in, and then obviously at a 9.5, this one would be worth much more as a 9 or a 10 at PSA, which I do think with the subgrades that we're looking at here, it would cross-grade to a PSA 10. The value is definitely higher there, but the turnaround time is just not there. I mean, for a card of this value, you're not going to spend $75 to express this to get it back and enough time to get it back at the same value. This cost me, again, $25, I think, to submit through CGC. to get it back in the same amount of time, or at least close to the same amount of time through PSA, would have been a $75 turnaround, and honestly, like, it's just not going to be worth it the vast majority of the time unless you know exactly what kind of grades that you're going to have coming back there. So with that, those are the ones that have come back. Now, looking at future submissions, I'm going to show you a couple cards that I have here. I've got a lot of cards I'm getting ready to submit here. We're not going to go through every single one of them, but I do want to kind of show you some of the stuff that I am sending out and why I am sending it there. So the first ones I'm going to show you here are the PSA, some of the PSA submissions that I'm looking at sending out, and these are in no particular order. I'm just going to grab a handful of them here and kind of walk you through why I picked those particular company there. So the first one you see here, this is a Vivid Voltage pre-release Charizard. The artwork on these are fantastic. I've been buying these up for a big submission. Again, grade all Charizards is a pretty good rule of thumb to live by. They all go up in value. As you can see, though, this card is very minty, obviously right out of the pack because this is a new set. If you can't tell from the camera, it is off-centered just a bit left to right. So this is what we're talking about. One of those things that's got a minor imperfection that would keep it from getting a 10 score, or possibly keep it from getting a 10 score at BGS or CGC, because you never know with the surface, you never know on the edges and stuff if they're going to be brought down. And a 9.5 in a card like this is going to kill the value so much more than a 10 at a company like that. So you really want to shoot for those 10s there on those particular ones. So this becomes just an obvious one that goes there. Same with the Jolteon here, the no hollow, or no stamp rather, Jolteon. The edges, a little bit of edge wear, a little bit of edge wear at the top. So I'm not saying that this one's going to come back as a PSA 10, but it's definitely not going to get a 10 score in the other two companies because of that damage wear on the card. So this becomes a really good candidate to send off to those particular companies, or to PSA rather, because it's going to have the highest value, not coming back at the 10. Gyarados, pre-release, again off-centered left to right. So with a company like PSA, this is not necessarily a nail in the coffin on the centering. Edge wear, very light on the edge wear there. So again, most likely a 9 to 9.5 with CGC or Beckett, but it has the outside chance of being a PSA 10. So that's why we're sending it there. Same with the Steelix, off-centered, left to right, just ever so slightly. Very light edge wear on the back. Again, we're sending it with the hopes for that 10 to come back in. And we'll show the Articuno because he was on there, and I don't want to tease you on there. But again, Articuno, this one's got a lot of scuffing on the surface. The centering is actually not bad on this particular one. It might be off a little bit left to right. But again, a little wear on the outside. So value-wise, the best place that this card's going to come back with is, it's not going to get a 10 in any of the companies, but if it comes back as a PSA 8, that PSA 8's worth much more than a CGC or BGS 8. So that's why we're choosing to send it there. Alright, so now we're going to look at some of the stuff that's going out to CGC. Kind of grab a handful of those. So we'll start with the Charizard here. The Charizard actually is for my personal collection, so that's another factor that comes into it as well. If you've got a card that you're keeping and the uniformity of your set is in one particular casing, you just keep getting that casing. I mean, this one's value is probably not going to get a 10. It's definitely not going to get a perfect 10. It is slightly off-centered from left to right. You can kind of tell if you look at it. It's not bad. Surface scores, again, on these newer ones are very hard to predict. There's no damage on the back. I would imagine that the edges would probably get a 9.5 because there is just the tiniest spot of white up here that is on there. So it's not going to get a perfect 10. It may get a 10, but mostly it's because it's going to go in my personal collection, and my personal collection for the set so far has been in the CGC, so that is why that guy is going there. This Charizard VMAX, this guy is actually very good contender for a black label. So there is the centering on the card is very strong. The overall surface of the card looks very strong. However, like I had mentioned before, sending it to CGC is kind of a nice test run for this particular card. So I can send it off to CGC comes back very quickly, comes back with very accurate grades. If it has those quad 10s, then I know that I can feel very confident about resubmitting to BGS at that point in time to try to get that coveted black label that's on there. So that's the reason why this one is going to CGC. The next couple here are Vivid Voltage. And I guess I had that other one separate here. These are the Vivid Voltage release ones. Now I went through and kind of cherry picked the ones these that I had for ones that had perfect centering, that had no defects on them, no print lines on them, no errors or issues that were on any of them. And these particular ones, again, I'm going to send with subgrades, hopefully to get some quad 10s. And again, if they come back with those quad 10s, then that gives me the opportunity to submit them back to BGS and hopefully get the black label for them. And if they come back at 9.5s, that gives me the opportunity to potentially cross-grade them down the line with PSA to get those PSA 10s. But again, with the speed of service and the turnaround time, I cannot emphasize that as much. The turnaround time and the cost, rather, is just very affordable to kind of test the waters on what these cards are graded. At an $8 for like the basic without or the subgrades, I mean, you can't buy a snap type for less than $5. So for $3, you can have your card professionally graded by somebody and tell you exactly what the value is on there, not to mention the extra value that's on there as well. Now, this Jolteon is another example of a card that I think could get a 10. The centering is perfect on front and back. There is a little bit of a white speck right here. I don't know if you can see it. Kind of see it on the camera here. There's a white speck right there. So I don't think it's going to get a quad 10, but I do think it is strong enough to get a 10. I'm also really curious on how CGC is going to grade these foils on the front. So we've had some difficulty. As you can see, the surface is just crazy glittery. I can't see anything under the magnification that I have. Obviously, they're using stuff more powerful than I'm going to use. But I'm curious to see what kind of surface score this gets through CGC. This is more of a test run because these cards in particular, if you can find a grading card company that is, I don't want to say lenient, but is more predisposed to grading the surface based on all the difficulties and challenges that a surface like this is going to have, it's definitely the company that you want to stick with, because high grades on these Legendary Collection reverse hollows are just insane on the value if you can get those higher grades on them. And then on the other side here, just kind of show you these last two and kind of the reason why. These particular ones are not particularly high value cards, so as a means to preserve the condition of the cards, because they're old cards. Team Rocket cards that are out there, hollows, not highly sought after ones, but they're in good condition now. There's not a ton of value in the cards graded versus ungraded. It does add value, but I want to preserve the condition of the card. And as we mentioned before, a snap type case, not a perfect storage container by any stretch of the imagination, but like $5. Or I can send them off to a professional grading company, get them encapsulated for like $8, and have them in my collection where I don't have to worry about them getting roughed up, banged up for any length of time that they're stored. So another reason why you may want to look at, again, a company like CGC for these particular type cards, just as a way to keep them safe, keep them stored, and then, you know, years down the line when they are up in value, or whenever you decide that you do not want them any longer in your collection, you can have them pristine condition and professionally graded already. Alright guys, well I hope you found that information helpful. Again, like I said, there's not a right or wrong answer, but these are some of the criteria that I use before I make that decision. If you want all your labels to match, you're fine with the turnaround times, you're fine with the cost, to do something a different way, then absolutely go do that. Again, this is about how to make the hobby enjoyable for yourselves. But again, there's a lot of information that's out there that is incorrect information, so a lot of the point of this video is really just to correct it and set the record straight. There are valuable resources that are out there for a variety of different collectors. Know the differences, but you really can't go wrong with any of these three companies. So if you have any other questions, leave them down in the comment section for me below. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. I appreciate it. And hit that notifications bell so you're notified when I put out future content. Like the video if you like this kind of content, and we will see you guys next time. Hobby Hero, out.